concept of decentralizing power. The variation in devolution is in the fact that a lot is done not only to transfer responsibilities but also resources and the autonomy of the subnational units, and that's what we see in Kenya. For the longest time in Kenya, there was discussion of imbalances, inequalities, marginalization of some region, and therefore the constitution, if we look at Wanyande and Boya 2016, was seen as a panacea to counter the challenges of development that were experienced for the longest time. So with devolution, as contained in the Constitution 2010 of Kenya, is that we have now county government which are semi-autonomous, which have freedom in terms of making decisions on utilization of resources and also expenditure, and also the element of financial raising. So they are quite autonomous in terms of making decisions. However, when financial, with the devolution of financial resources, where whatever is collected at national level is by law expected to be transferred to the county government, a number of things have happened. One, for some of the marginalized counties, was it that now they have an opportunity to deal with to counter marginalization, what some people may call it's our turn now to utilize resources that were stuck at the national level for the longest, or do we see this as an avenue for promoting service delivery? So that's a key question that we're asking ourselves, even as we figure out fiscal decentralization and service delivery. Let's go to the next, thank you. So a few coverage in terms of what is contained in fiscal decentralization in terms of Kenyan context. One is that this is anchored in the Constitution, and we've just highlighted it's been under implementation since 2013 when county devolution came into effect out of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. And the idea, when you look at the spirit of Constitution, was to improve effectiveness of service delivery, promote public participation where citizens can take decision, can engage in terms of making determination of how resources are utilized at county level, with a view to enhancing transparency and efficiency in service delivery. A number of articles in the Constitution which talk about fiscal decentralization. Article 203 stipulates that 15% of the national revenue that is collected must be what we call shareable revenue, must be dispersed to county level. Article 209 gives county government authority to also raise own revenue, and we shall be looking at that shortly in terms of generating own revenue. Article 219 argues that it's the responsibility of the national government to ensure that the disbursement to counties are timely and may not be altered, and that according to the PFM Act, they're supposed to be set on quarterly basis. However, the practice of it has not been very good. So when we look at the Public Finance Management Act, which again tries to operationalize the Constitution, was that there are three different streams of flow from national to the county government. One is that there's the equitable share, then there's equalization fund for counties that were highly marginalized before the Constitution, and also conditional grants. Our analysis is that for the last 10 years or thereabout, about that $3 billion has been dispersed to the county government. County government are responsible for human resources, they are responsible for running the government, and therefore it's quite a huge amount of money, about 360 billion every year in Kenya shillings. So this is quite a huge amount of money that has gone to the sub-national level. The question that we're asking in the next slide is, what has been the impact of this? Literature on the effectiveness of fiscal decentralization in Kenya is quite limited. I think as per our literature, the literature that we have reviewed, perhaps what comes closer is Rugo 2021 and Bao 2019, who argue that a lot is expected in terms of how resources that are channeled to the sub-national level are expected to help in service delivery. So the question relating to this is, are the sub-national units enabling citizenship to participate in this? And we're looking at this as a process in planning, budgeting, and expenditure at the county level. How much do citizens engage? Second, number 3 is that we know there are many interest groups beyond the elected leaders, beyond people we see as the face of the county, who in this case we call it political elite, who sometimes have a lot of interest in terms of how the resources at the county level are being utilized, how planning and expenditure are happening at that level. So the question is, do the interests of political elites in tandem with the public service delivery, or they have own interests? Again, this we may not get on paper, we may not get on statistics, but through primary data collection. So based on this, in this paper we are asking for pertinent question. One is, how inclusive have the citizen be in terms of fiscal decentralization? Do we see citizen playing a bigger role perhaps than it was prior to 2013? Again, at county level, we may not do this for all the 47 counties that are talked about in the morning, but to select a few and see the trends of fiscal decentralization, to see how much money goes to each individual counties and how is it spent. Because allegations are that most of the counties are spending over 90% of the resources disbursed to them on recurrent expenditure. Then what do Kenyans feel about government role on service delivery under the devolution? How do political elites impact on decision making at that level? And one of the emerging questions was, do we see relationship and variation when we look at the relationship between leadership at the county level, that is the elected leaders, and the elites in terms of how they make decisions or how decisions are taken? So those are the 5 questions that we hope to answer in this paper. And just a highlight of the methodologies that we're following. One, we're using a mixed method. We collect both quantitative and qualitative data in order to understand the trend and also the intricacies of non-quantifiable element of political elites in decision making. In terms of quantitative data, we are using control of budget reports. We are looking at Afrobarometer around 9 and Kenya Devolution Program survey. In terms of the qualitative, then we're following some key informants interview and focus group discussion, which we presented yesterday as part of the Kenyan team. So we are doing this, all of us, but perhaps having emphasis on different elements in the instrument. In terms of the analysis, we're looking at thematic analysis, looking at fiscal decentralization and inclusivity, political elites and fiscal decentralization, government provision of public good, what do Kenyans feel about that, and the nature of leadership, elites, and fiscal observation. So that's basically the methodology that we are following, but I would like to share a few of the findings that we have at the moment in terms of what we're seeing in our data set. One is that, sorry for this very crowded graph, but it tries to show how counties have received the money from the national government, how they have absorbed, given we are using 2018, 2019, and 2019-2020 in terms of analyzing. And you can see that assuming the money, of course, is not equal across counties, but it's a proportion of how much is allocated and is utilized in the county. What this tells us is that counties at very different levels in terms of absorbing fund. And the question is, with some leading like Narok and Marsabit at 72 and 68%, and others like Vihiga and Siaya at very low levels, do we see variation in terms of service delivery in these counties? Like, can we infer that a county with high absorption rate perhaps is leading to better service delivery, and vice versa for the counties that are not absorbing? But when we look at the procurement expenditure mechanism, perhaps that's where the key issues are in terms of absorption. We also talk of the disbursement from the national to the county, sometimes that are done, and done or with some favorism. I'm sorry to say this, that there are some counties, depending on how governor relate to the national government, then they might have their money not released in time. So in spite of this being entrenched in the Constitution. Let's move to the next. Using the Afrobarometer data, we asking whether people are satisfied or they can see a change in service delivery. The good news is that when you talk to members of public, there's a high level of agreement, with majority of about 68% indicating that they have seen a change or difference in service delivery since the devolution came into effect. And when you look at gender divide, and also we look at the perception in line with the education, two things emerge is that we see a high level of agreement among male and than female, and also highly educated people perhaps are the ones who giving indication that there are changes in services that are being delivered at national level on the basis of devolution. We have analyzed the data also on the basis of rural-urban divide, and the rural folks seem to be seeing more change when you are analyzing that data, meaning that there could be the rural counties are perhaps doing much more, or they are seen to be doing much more than the urban related counties. When we also look at it in age cohort, I think elderly people seem to agree that there are changes in service delivery more than the younger population, perhaps out of the expectation. Let's go to the next. Then, as per the Constitution, citizens are expected to be engaging with the government in terms of taking decisions about the finances that are at county level. So, unfortunately, when we ask members, again this is from Afrobarometer, how easy it is to access, ease of accessing budget legislation, legislative act, and project plans, it becomes a little bit questionable whether public is aware. One is because when we look at the difficult or very difficult, finding almost 80% of the 2,400 participants in Afrobarometer indicating that it's very difficult to access this document. And related to that, in the next slide we'll be seeing when we ask about, can you make an influence, or does your voice count in terms of making decisions on financial matters at county level? Again, a huge significant percentage say that they seem not to influence, or they don't think they can influence decision. So the element of contradiction between what is in the Constitution and perhaps what is happening in practice. We move to the next in the interest of time. Then, do they attend community meeting? Because the planning, the budgeting, and expenditure process is envisioned to start at the lower level where people air their views, and then those are collated to a higher level, we call sub-county, and then to the county level. But when you ask people whether they attend a community meeting where these decisions are taken, then again we find about 41 would say they would not do so even if they had a chance. So meaning that we have a sizable members of public who seem not to be interested in attending to this forum. I hope I'm keeping to time now. Right? Then, when we have these elected leaders in Afrobarometer, we ask whether people have ever, in the last 12 months, met their leaders, talked to them about an issue, and they think whether they would be listened to. Again, an indication of the connection that we have with our leaders. Apparently, a huge, significant percentage say that they thought they would be listened to. But again, the forum they go, or the forums for where these decisions are taken, they are not attending. So how do we expect people to influence? They would think they are councillors, or they would listen to them, but yet we don't go to the called meetings. So in our survey, in terms of collecting data, we just want to highlight, and I know Anne, when she was presenting in the morning, about pressing issues at different levels, and we collect this at the national level. What are the difficult, what are the issues that people identify with at national level, or pressing issues at their level that they would like the government to address? We can go to that. And I know, Anne, you used the data for 2018, and we also have the round 9 data that shows some of the devolved function. I think health was number 4. It has maintained as that level, and is one of the one of the devolved function. We have education, part of which is also. We have food and farming as some of the issues that Kenyans would like to see government addressing, and also infrastructure. Water supply, water is also a devolved function. Not to mention the management of the economy, corruption and employment. This is drawn from Afrobarometer data. And therefore, when we look at the devolved function, there seems not to be a change even after devolution in terms of them being addressed at the local level. Next. Again, when we look at the urban divide, the preference for these issues, like when you look at the health, it's more of rural areas that members are concerned with compared to urban areas, because perhaps people in urban areas have choices, right? Education also is quite a challenge in rural areas, right? But when you compare that with crime and security, you can see again the change. Crime is more of an urban problem. Water supply, again, another devolved function, but more of a problem in rural areas than urban areas. So again, we're saying when you look at this problem and we disaggregate data in rural-urban divide, we see variation. So meaning that counties, depending on where they're located, who are the majority of them, then they need to focus on different issues. So the same ranking across time, I know Karuti also mentioned about this yesterday, in terms of how key problem and challenges are in Kenya. But again, why we present between 2014 and 2021, because this question has been asked all around. But the question is, what comes first? You can see it's only in 2021 when management of the economy, perhaps Kenyans have started casting doubt in the nature of government and management of the economy. But corruption has been oscillating between number 2 and number 3, meaning public see a lot of challenges or issues to do with corruption. Health is among the number 4, number 5, number 1, depending on the period, in terms of the issues that Kenyans have expressed concern about. Same with crime and security, and also water supply, but at different ranking based on the time. But the basket of the problem seem to be more common across time, meaning that even with devolution, we started in 2014, the issues of devolved function still keep emerging or coming into the space. So in our recent surveys, we were asking in our focus group discussions, in different parts of the country where we have conducted the survey, what are the pressing issues, and wanted to see whether the same issues that we collected in Afrobarometer are recurring in this level. And we can just highlight a few of them again, because the data is quite long and we are still going on with transcription, is that the issue of sharing resources emerged among members of the public in terms of how does national decide what to share with the counties, right? And that was mentioned more precisely. This is in Nakuru. Lack of proper channels of reporting corruption cases, such that even when you have identified a case, you're not sure where to go to. Access to water is a main problem in counties like Makueni. Security and conflict of resources in Isiolo. And in Nairobi, one of the respondents was saying, I'm a community health volunteer, and last week I referred an infant to of 6 weeks to a hospital in Kibera. The patient came back and told me that the clinic lacked 6-week vaccine for the baby, meaning that health issues that we expect have been handled at county level are still not addressed properly. So the big question is, what can we say about the billions of dollars that have been channeled to the county, to the sub-national level? One is that fiscal decentralization as a tool of equalization, efficiency, and addressing inequity is a good tool. Definitely, there's a lot that is happening, but perhaps not to the level that is envisioned in the Constitution. The Constitution offers opportunity for citizens to engage not only in governance, but also in financial management matters at the county level. However, the forthright or the actual participation by citizens appear to be quite elusive and minimal. So again, now with the law allowing, but our practical element, and this resonates with what we had yesterday in Morocco, people saying, I can't waste my time to go to a public meeting or to do this. Well, I have my own issues to deal with. Right. So it is also mirroring here. Sometimes you don't see the value of your being in the meetings because you can't be sure that your input is going to be considered in the decision making. One of the problems we found is that even where people have participated, they aired their views in terms of the project, in terms of how they would like to see expenditure. Even when those decisions are taken up there, the feedback mechanism is quite is lacking. And therefore, next year when you call, you will not attend. Secondly, is that public participation, which is a requirement, is not clear. Sometimes documents are brought in the morning, a public participation event is in the afternoon, and people come with voluminous of documents. You have no time to read, or sometimes you don't even know where to start with, and citizens complaining about that a lot. So participation, what we're calling inclusive citizenship, seem to be lacking, especially in financial decision-making process. A lot of resources have been devolved or sent to the county level, and when we look at the impact, is quite diverse and mixed. In some counties we have successes, in others we have very minimal success stories to write about. In all the counties that we have visited, and you ask people, now that you don't take decisions, whom do you think does, all right? And when we are talking to people, you find there are so many people who are not part of the system, but who are involved in decision making at that level. What I think in our framing would call the political elite, and we are trying to synthesize how do these people decide or influence what county governments are going to implement as far as the utilization of resources are concerned. In one county that will remain unnamed, we had a decentralized procurement system. When a new governor came, he centralized now that to the county headquarters, meaning that even what sub-county and the ward level could procure directly, or at least do procurement at that level, was again moved. So there's a lot of concentration or centralization at the national, at the headquarter levels, at the county level, again guarding the element of service delivery. When we talk to many of our respondents, they argue that when you consider this governing or political elite, they are more interested in pursuing their interests as opposed to interest of the citizen as far as service delivery is concerned. Meaning that they would want to support implementation of the project and programs that they are likely to benefit more than what perhaps may be beneficial to the country. The issue of infrastructure project at the county level was mentioned a number of times, where people are more concerned about buildings, and they can abandon a building because it was started by their opponent and start another one, either a hospital or a classroom, just in the neighborhood. So when we talk of inclusive citizenship, I think as far as fiscal decentralization is concerned, we're seeing it as a mirage that perhaps will take time before it comes to fruition. And one of the key institutions in fiscal decentralization, which is National Treasury, I think I mentioned here yesterday about how disbursements are made irregular, unclear, and sometimes being sent to county levels just a few days to the end of the year, and then the money is returned to the treasury because the county has no capacity to spend the money. So there's a bit of work to be done in this area, and that's what we have for now. We hope that in the near future, once we complete the field work, we'll have better results to at least confirm what we are making as our conclusion. So thank you very much. Thank you. That's the last one.
Thank you, Paul, for this informative presentation and analysis. I open the debate and the discussion, taking into account that we started with a delay of 25 minutes. I'm sorry for that. So any question or any comment? Yes, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. I have a question question on the structure of the county governments. Are they made up of elected officials? And do you, if they belong to different political parties, for example, would you have instances in which the county governments could be under a different political party, and in which case there might be tension or conflict with the governor and the central state? And if those things have occurred, how have they been resolved in the Kenyan case? And the second issue is the disbursement of resources from the center to the counties. I know you have legislation on that, but do you have cases in which the central government insists on what should be the priority areas? Should it be education or health, over the heads of the counties? Thank you.
Excuse me.
Do you want to?
Thank you, Professor Alois. Anything else? Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Dr. Idris.
Okay. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation. I have two questions. One is related to the fact that education, there is 19%, around 19%, yes? So that, for me, is just, it raises my eyebrow about how come that education is not an important aspect of the kind of pressing issues. In the context of Morocco, education is always at the top, among other things, of course. My second is again the low percentage as far as what you have there as democracy, or so this. I wonder if this has to do also with with how the speaking about democracy, for example, because if people understand that probably participative democracy can contribute to better service delivery, so how was the question asked so that democracy becomes at the lowest, I think 5%, if I remember. 5% or something along those lines. So my question is really how was the question about democracy asked so that it ended up there? Was it just an abstract notion, or that's my question.
Chair.
Please.
Thank you, Paul. When Lloyd raised this question, actually, he has triggered me to think hard. And thinking hard because physical decentralization, a lot has been written on physical decentralization, just like decentralization itself, because there is no form of decentralization that doesn't have the physical element. All of them, all of them have got a physical element in them. And the question then to ask is, what should we be looking for as something that is very new? One, the point he has raised of examining whether political party domination in a particular area makes a difference is very important. And in our context, I think trying to look at those particular counties in terms of absorption, in terms of even how much they deploy in terms of development resources, because all subnational units deploy different amounts of funds for development. depending on their needs. There is no one who has ever been able to deploy, to use about 70% of their resources on development. Everybody is using under 50% of funds to development. So I think that's the kind of analysis one may want to make, looking at regional variations in terms of how the counties are using their funds. The second element, I think that it will make your paper much more interesting, is to look at what are the priorities that the counties are putting in terms of the funds for equalization of fund. That's a national government fund. Then the equitable revenue is what is allocated to them. And then the conditional grant is specific for a particular purpose. So what difference does it make in terms of how the subnational unit manages these funds? Do they manage the same funds differently or not? Do they treat them in the same manner? Or do they say that this money comes from national government and therefore we don't care? This is equalization fund, we don't care. We care most about what is coming from as our equitable share. That's what we want. What's the argument about how they use those particular funds? Now, separate from that issue is the recognition that physical decentralization is accompanied a lot by autonomy in how you use your money. In fact, that's why it's even why we link it to decentralization. You are much more autonomous in how you use your money. But the only money we can say that the subnational units here are autonomous in terms of using is what they are given by constitution. That's 15%. The rest of the money is conditional grants. What kind of leverage, what kind of independence, what kind of autonomy do they have in how they manage those funds by the national government? Because if the national government comes and exerts pressure on how these funds will be used, then we are getting into a problem of autonomy of the subnational units, because they're supposed to have their own laws. They're supposed to be independent. And the constitution provides for them not as, what can I say, they are not autonomous of the national government, but they are interdependent. Are not independent, but interdependent, meaning that there is no level of government that is senior than the other. So what does that mean in terms of the funds that they receive from the government? What does physical decentralization mean in terms of how they operate these particular funds? And the last one, of course, has got to do with the perceptions of the national or of the county government elites, the governor, the MCAs, and the rest. How do they treat these three different categories of funds? Do they treat them as separate? Do they have different views, or it's money for the counties? Those are issues that you may want to think much more in your data and see. Not that you have got answers to them, it's thinking. How do we treat these new issues, these new dimensions, in order for us to say that we are getting something new? When a subnational unit receives funds which are conditional by the national government, it treats them separate from when it has got its own funds.
Thank you, Professor Karuti. Anna?
Thank you, Paul and Douglas. I'm just thinking on what Pastor Kanina said, because when we did the selection of the counties to be covered, we looked at the ability to absorb funds, and we selected countries that were poor performance in terms of absorption of funds, the ones that are very, that were categorized very low, and also those that are categorized as some of the best performance. And one of the counties got surprised, which was actually, I think, number 4 of the best performing counties. When you did the interviews, it seemed to be the worst performing county in terms of development outcomes, what the citizens are saying the county has done. And so we are worried, what does exactly absorption of funds mean? And even if it's whether conditional or non-conditional grants that they receive. Assuming that all situations were equal, then we probably should have similar outcomes, but this is not what we're getting. So you have a very efficient county in terms of funds absorption, but in the real sense, it is a worst performing county in terms of, for example, healthcare service delivery. So how do we connect the two?
Thank you, thank you. Anything else? Okay, we can go with the answer for,
Okay.
Mike.
Thank you very much for these very helpful and insightful comments. I think they make us really jog our mind in terms of where we want to see this paper going forward. Let me start with the last question that Anne has asked about the absorption and service delivery. This is the elephant in the room because I think when you read the literature, you'd expect that counties that have good absorption rate, they also are good in terms of service delivery. And that's why in the selection, because we could not reach to all counties, we agreed, let's pick 2 that were high performing, then 2 in the middle, and 2 very low. And those are the counties where we went to collect data, and I think you did that in the presentation yesterday. And therefore, when you go and ask what the money has been done, or what has money done in terms of service delivery, then you find a completely different story. So we don't want to insinuate that high absorption rate of allocated funds, whether shareable revenue, conditional grant, or even the equalization fund means good service. Perhaps it's getting better channels to move the money to people's pocket that they end up spending. So and our next level of analysis is to ask, now let's look at this county A and see for the period how much was allocated maybe to health, how much was allocated to this, and within those sectors, what did it end up doing? Perhaps that's the story in the final analysis that can help us to understand the element of fiscal decentralization and service delivery. The county government, and as Lloyd asked, is composed of elected leaders. So it's like another government with the governor, the president, with what we call members of county assembly, MCAs representing ward, who are also elected to offer legislative role. So it so happened that in any county you might find a governor elected from party A, some of the MCAs elected from party B, and therefore there's a lot of coalition and also I would say negotiation that is happening. But the question you raise, so other than being elected and the law guiding, then the practice of this is very clear. That if, say, the national government party is party A, and then you as a county is seen to be inclined towards an opposition party, and that's happening across the board. There are many counties that the county governments are not necessarily aligned to the ruling party. Then there's a lot of challenges, and you feel that. But in order to address this, the Council of Governors, which is an institution that is recognized and established where perhaps governors can meet and air their issues to be addressed by the government. So that becomes the avenue or the recourse when this is happening. But definitely it may not be in black and white, but chances we had even in our previous work where the Treasury will tell counties where they are aligned to that we are going to open the system at this time. So you can do your IFMIs, you can do your budgeting, you can load in your requests and the money comes. Those who may not be aligned will not know the system opened. And by the time they're trying to do their disbursement to utilize their money, the system fails because, again, that's the element of national treasury. Sometimes the system is closed deliberately when they don't want counties to spend. I think the second question on whether national government determines how money is to be spent, there's a bit of independence in that counties are supposed to prepare their budgets independent that are approved by the assembly at county level. So ideally, the national government should not directly influence how counties are spending the money, but the controller of budget, which is an intergovernmental institution, now will work on what has been approved by the county assembly to disburse funds. In terms of education, I remember the presentation that Dries, and this is very important, that Kenyans don't see it as a problem. I would say two things, that even when we were looking at comparative data yesterday, in terms of education, while other social services, Kenya was ranking low, in terms of education, I think it was high, and those presentations are here. So perhaps this adequate, and I remember one of the elaboration by Karuti was that the ability to read and write at a given level, Kenya would be much higher, even sometimes a grade 3, the reading or the mathematical equation could be higher than South Africa. So education has been well funded, there are enough schools, so perhaps it may not be one of the pressing need at a particular point in time. Right, so that's what I would explain in this, and it also resonates with the data that the framing that Karuti did yesterday. I didn't quite get the question on democracy. Maybe that one I'll pick up between you, because ranking of democracy, was it about the participation? Or
no, the question, how the question was formulated about democracy.
Which question was that?
We can talk about it later.
We can talk about it
later.
Oh, sorry. Now I get it. Is democracy and political rights? I think the question was asked, what are the problems that you see as most pressing? And each of the respondents was required to give 3. So this analysis is based on the most common mentioned. I think we rank about 10 or so. So looking at the rural-urban divide, looking at in round 21, in round 9 of 2021, and that's where democracy featured, especially as an issue that is urban. So democracy, people mentioning it, not being asked about democracy, is being asked, give us 3 problems. So some people would mention democracy and human rights. Yeah, so it was not purely on democracy in Kenya. We have a separate question that asks about the democratic measurement in the country, and that's not part of the problem that perhaps Kenyan mentioned. But I would say that the democratic space in Kenya is quite open, and people are able to criticize system even when they are innate, and so it may not feature as a major problem in Kenya, I would say. Then thank you, Karuti, for the insights about where to go, what to make this paper different. And for sure, political parties, affiliation, and governance, that has a role to play in determining how fiscal decentralization is done. There are three main different channels of disbursement. Of course, the equitable share, the equalization fund, and conditional grant. This is something that once we zero in on the 6 counties that we are working in now, we may be able to disaggregate and see how this is being considered. Do the political elites see it differently and utilize it differently? My guess is that this is very common, so they pay attention to the bigger picture that everybody comes to audit, but when it comes to equalization, to disaster management funds, and conditional grant, I think there's a bit of leeway in terms of how they spend, and perhaps that's where a lot of it is misutilized. The other question is on identification of the elites, the governors, the executive, other leaders, and their impression about these funds. Of course, we expect that there's a lot of variation depending on the interest that the governor may be having. Sometimes the elite, the governing elite, who may not necessarily be appointed or elected leaders, but they also play a big role in determining where do resources go and how they are utilized. So these are the issues that perhaps we need to dig deeper through the focus group discussion that we're doing in order to strengthen our paper and make sure that it's not just to talk about the flow, but the politics around the flow of funds from national to county government. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. A big applause. Now, let's listen to our PhD students from Morocco. Raphael, you are ready?
One comment for, just to share the comment.
Yes.
From George Michuki, who was saying, Moranga Moranga example shows a contradiction. Where there is a high absorption, but very little impact on the ground. Probably it's good accounting by the county governing elite, e.g. the issue of 1 cow per household that was very likely meant to show at a fee, but costing public money, hence high absorption, but no impact to the community.
That was you want to answer to that? Just repeat the question.
I'm saying the Moranga example, the county of Moranga example, shows a very good example, contradiction where there is high absorption but little impact on the ground. Probably it's good accounting by the county governing elite, e.g. the issue of 1 cow per household that is largely meant for show at a fee but costing public money, hence the high absorption but no impact on the community.
2 minutes, Mr. Paul.
Yes.
Do you understand the question now?
Yes, I think I have an idea. I think that's what Dr. Ann talked about, that you find that the county has very high absorption rates, but that does not translate to proper service delivery at the grassroots level or at the citizen level. So, and I think that's something that maybe we are going to tease out from the data and understand why is this the case. And I think that's what Dr. Ann talked about. So I think we are able to get more findings on that.
Yeah, I think, sorry,
no, it's okay.
I think we have to be careful about absorption. What is being absorbed here? Is it recurrent or capital expenses? You know, because physical decentralization across the board, across all the dimensions, whether political, whether administrative, or even deconcentration, all of them are associated with very high levels of current expenditure. Something happens that when you actually, the more physical decentralization you give, the more the current expenditure goes up and less for capital. So we may be talking about very high levels of absorption because of the wages. You know, the recurrent is is higher than the money meant for development. I will not be surprised about that with a subnational unit, which has a very high potential for development, like Muranga is, in the sense that they will have more labor force, because they did absorb people from the previous, before the 2010 constitution. So one may want to tease out the data properly and see where do we have the highest absorption rates in this, and make that particular distinction. The second thing to look at is look at the Auditor General's report and see the audit in the last 10 years of the counties, and look at which counties are having audit qualified accounts and adverse mentions. Because that will trigger now an argument on what is actually happening in terms of expenditure pattern in every county.
Sure.
And once you see the trend in terms of numbers, if there are some that qualified accounts are increasing rather than decreasing, then that gives a story about physical decentralization and autonomy of the counties, that there is less accountability the more you deepen physical decentralization.
Okay, thank you. So let's listen now to our PhD students from Morocco. We start with Asma Amahyan. So you have half an hour, please. We are listening to you, Asma. Hello. Half an hour? Including question? Okay.
Just a second.
Mike. Asma,
Just a second.
do you hear me?
Subject.
Yeah.
There is
15 minutes presentation.
Asma? Asma? Hello? Asma? Asma, could you hear us? Hello?
Oui. Allô? Bonjour, Asma.
Bonjour.
D'accord. Donc, vous avez 15 minutes, en fait. Je rectifie le tir pour me corriger. Je suis rappelé à l'ordre par M. Paul pour ne pas vous donner plus que 15 minutes. Donc, vous aurez 15 minutes pour la discussion et 15 minutes pour la présentation. On vous écoute.
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. J'aimerais de prime abord remercier pour m'avoir invité de participer à cette conférence. Ma présentation porte sur le sujet de la démocratie participative dans le contexte et pratique du cadre de la région de la région se pointe à l'enseigne. Ce sujet n'est pas sans intérêt, car il nous permet de souligner les avancées de la démocratie participative dans le contexte et aussi sur l'activité de la participation dans la nation. La problématique que cela est celle de savoir. Oui.
Could you speak loud? Est-ce que vous pouvez parler plus fort parce qu'on est en train d'essayer de s'adapter avec un problème de son. Donc si vous pouvez parler un peu plus fort et tout doucement pour que s'il vous plaît.
Donc ça va prendre plus de temps.
Oui, mais juste avec si vous pouvez demander.
Non, j'ai déclenché le chronomètre, moi.
Oui. La problématique que soulève ce sujet est dans quelle mesure les textes d'adaptation contribuent au renforcement de la participation citoyenne au niveau. Il convient de rappeler que la démocratie participative est de crise au gouvernement représentatif et de crise émise au gouvernement. Le pouvoir était déconnecté de la réalité et des attentes des citoyens, ainsi que l'élévation des niveaux d'éducation en Occident, motivant ainsi les citoyens. La démocratie participative a vu le jour en premier aux États-Unis dans les années 60 en vue de transformer la relation